Vladimir Putin believed Ukraine would be an easy target. He ordered massive strikes against power stations, key infrastructure, and civilian areas in cities such as Kyiv, Lviv, and Kharkiv. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians were plunged into darkness, yet the campaign failed to break their spirit. Even with electricity cut and winter temperatures setting in, Kyiv's residents refused to be intimidated, gathering outdoors and showing defiance instead of fear. Despite relentless pressure, Russia was unable to subdue them. The strike on Belgorod. During the night of January 24th, the Russian border city of Belgorod was hit by a devastating assault. Advanced Ukrainian HIMARS systems struck with precision, shutting down the city almost instantly. Thermal power facilities were damaged, transformers detonated, and the water supply collapsed. The scale of destruction was so severe that even Russian state media could not fully conceal it. More than 40 missiles struck vital locations across the city, in what was clearly a deliberate act of retaliation for earlier attacks on Kyiv. The attack on Kyiv and Ukraine's response. Earlier that same night, Russia carried out one of its largest missile strikes against Kyiv. Hypersonic Kinzhal and Zircon missiles, along with Iskander ballistic missiles, were launched with the explicit aim of leaving the capital without heat or electricity. Thermal power plants 5 and 6 were among the main targets. Ukraine's response was swift and symbolic. If their cities were to be left in darkness, the consequences would be felt on Russian territory as well. That response came down hard on Belgorod. Ukrainian missile forces moved quickly, deploying their most advanced weapons before the smoke from the Russian barrage had settled. The operation relied heavily on next-generation HIMARS systems and low-observable Flamingo cruise missiles. What initially looked like flashes in the night sky soon became a nightmare for Belgorod's residents. An estimated 40 to 50 missiles were launched in a coordinated strike. Videos shared on local Telegram channels captured scenes of panic, with civilians screaming and rushing for shelter as explosions rocked the city. Russia's S-400 and Pantsir air defense systems were effectively overwhelmed by the intensity of the attack. The targets were chosen with precision, focusing on the Belgorod thermal power plant and key energy infrastructure. Massive fireballs indicated direct hits on turbine sections, the most vulnerable components of such facilities. Once the turbines were disabled, power across the city collapsed within seconds. Large parts of Belgorod were immediately plunged into darkness. Although Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov attempted to downplay the incident by highlighting crater sizes, the widespread damage caused by dozens of explosions could not be hidden.
Belgorod was not the only target. Ukrainian strikes also reached regions such as Oryol, Bryansk, and Penza. Even areas closer to Moscow have increasingly come under pressure, signaling that Ukrainian retaliation extends far beyond border skirmishes. These operations have repeatedly challenged Russia's air defense capabilities and demonstrated a level of coordination rarely seen. The attacks marked one of the most complex and calculated examples of symmetrical retaliation in modern warfare. The Oryol Trigger. To understand how this operation unfolded, we need to turn the clock back 3 days to January 21 and focus on Oryol. What later plunged Belgorod into total darkness actually began there. Oryol was the technological spark that set everything else in motion. From Moscow down to Oryol, from Belgorod towards Saratov and Engels along the Volga, and further south to Krasnodar, vast stretches of Russian territory were gradually caught in a spreading arc of destruction. Entire regions lost power almost simultaneously. Hundreds of thousands of people were left without electricity or heat, and essential public services ground to a halt. The blackout triggered confusion and disorder across large parts of the country. The strike near Moscow. To grasp how bold this operation was, one must first look at Moscow itself, the center of Russian political and military authority. The capital was surrounded by layers of defense, panzer systems, S-400 batteries, and electronic warfare units. Moscow was portrayed as untouchable. That image collapsed in a single night. Explosions reported in the Serpukhov area made it clear that this was not an isolated malfunction or accident. The pattern pointed to a coordinated strike designed to rupture the energy infrastructure protecting the capital. The so-called energy ring around Moscow had been deliberately targeted and breached. Ukraine's energy blindness strategy. While Russia attempted to plunge Ukraine into darkness by striking Kyiv's power grid with Kh-22 and Kinzhal missiles, Ukraine answered with its own strategy, energy blindness. Instead of responding symmetrically, Ukraine focused on disabling the systems that kept Russia's regions functioning. The first and most decisive phase of this approach unfolded in Oryol on January 21. Ukraine introduced a new jet-powered weapon into the operation, the Flamingo cruise missile. Flying at extremely low altitude, it slipped beneath Russian radar coverage and struck the Oryol combined heat and power plant. The impact was devastating. Flamingo's heavy warhead hit the turbine hull, exposing a critical vulnerability in Russia's S-400 air defense systems. More importantly, the strike fractured Russia's unified power grid, creating a weakness that would soon be exploited elsewhere.
The Belgorod blackout. The true collapse came 3 nights later, on January 24th, in Belgorod. Shaken by the success of the Oryol strike, Russia redeployed much of its air defense northward, leaving Belgorod dangerously exposed. Ukrainian missile units immediately recognized the opening. What followed was described by Russian sources as the longest and most intense bombardment the city had experienced. This was not indiscriminate fire. The strikes were carefully aimed at key components of the Belgorod thermal power plant, control centers, cooling systems, and high-voltage transformer stations. Within moments, the city was plunged into darkness. Pressure across multiple regions. The operation did not stop there. Further south, Oryol was struck again, with social media footage showing direct hits on turbine structures and switching facilities. This was more than a local blackout. The plant sustained the region's industrial base. Its disablement sent shockwaves through the local economy. As the night progressed, residents in Saratov and Engels were jolted awake by the sound of drones and explosions overhead. Airports in Saratov and Penza were shut down, flights suspended, and civilian airspace sealed off. Engels carried particular strategic weight as it hosts key bases for Russia's long-range bombers. Ukrainian drones reaching this area exposed a stark reality. Even Russia's most valuable military assets were no longer beyond reach. The Krasnodar tragedy. The weakest and most tragic link in this chain was Krasnodar and the town of Apsheronsk. Here, the war crossed a line from catastrophe into humiliation. As Ukrainian drones entered the area, Russian air defense units reacted in panic. Video footage later revealed a chilling scene. An S-300 missile launched by Russian forces veered off course and slammed directly into a civilian home in Apsheronsk. The images are devastating. A family house is torn apart, its roof ripped away by the very military meant to defend it. From another angle, flames consume the building while civilians stand helpless nearby. This was not a freak accident. It was the result of poor training, outdated systems, and chaos under pressure. In its attempt to stop Ukraine, Russia ended up striking its own citizens. Similar disorder unfolded in Belgorod, where the Mayakovskaya hydroelectric plant and nearby areas came under fire, exposing once again the inability of Russian air defenses to provide real protection.
The Yeysk strike. Ukraine followed up with a direct hit on one of Russia's most critical logistical hubs, Yeysk. Located on the Sea of Azov, the city hosts both a strategic air base and a military port, key arteries supplying Russia's southern front. The strike was swift and devastating. Local sources and leaked assessments confirmed that power was cut almost instantly. plunging approximately 80,000 people, including military personnel and airbase housing, into complete darkness. To put that into perspective, it was the equivalent of shutting down an entire mid-sized European city in seconds. The destruction of the main transformer station crippled far more than civilian life. Radar systems went offline, fuel pumps stopped working, and ammunition loading equipment froze in place. Ironically, while Russian National Guard units were concentrated around Moscow, Yeysk, the back door of Russia's southern defenses, was left exposed. Psychological and structural shock. The most damaging consequences were not only physical but psychological. While Kyiv's mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, managed to restore heating to thousands of homes despite sustained Russian strikes, the Kremlin struggled to contain fires and chaos close to its own capital. The house destroyed in Absheronsk marked a turning point. For years, Putin's unspoken contract with the public was simple: obedience in exchange for protection. That contract collapsed the moment Russian citizens saw their own air defense systems killing civilians. A new fear has taken hold. When sirens sound, people no longer wonder whether a Ukrainian drone is approaching. They fear their own missiles. The question echoing across Russia is chillingly simple. Who is more dangerous, the enemy or those meant to defend us? When a population begins to fear its protectors more than its adversaries, a regime enters its most dangerous phase. Industrial and energy paralysis. Russia is a country where winter temperatures routinely fall to -20 or even -30 degrees Celsius. In such conditions, a blackout is not merely an inconvenience, it is a shutdown order. When electricity fails, the pumps that keep centralized heating systems running stop immediately. Hot water circulation ceases, pipes cool rapidly, and within hours the water inside them freezes, expands, and ruptures the system from within. This is exactly what is now unfolding across Russia's interior regions. In many cases, the damage is not even caused directly by strikes, but by long-standing neglect that Ukraine's attacks have sharply accelerated. In Irkutsk, transformers have been seen exploding as extreme cold overwhelms aging infrastructure, leaving residents freezing inside their homes. In the Komi Republic, decaying power lines are collapsing under stress. Ukraine's campaign has acted as a catalyst, turning chronic deterioration into an acute national crisis. Even if the fighting stopped tomorrow, repairing the destroyed heating and plumbing systems in places like Yeysk or the outskirts of Moscow would take months, if not years. Pipes buried inside walls would need to be fully replaced. The long-term cost to the Russian economy is unpredictable, but will certainly reach into the billions of rubles. Ukraine is not only inflicting damage for today, it is shaping economic consequences that will linger for a decade.
The fragility of the unified power system. To understand why these strikes are so destructive, one must look at Russia's centralized energy architecture, known as the Unified Power System, UPS. Designed in the Soviet era, this system tightly interlinks regional power producers into a single, sprawling network. When major generation hubs such as Oryol and Belgorod go offline, the entire system loses balance. Electrical load is instantly redistributed to neighboring regions. Transformers and substations, many already outdated, are pushed beyond their limits. The result is failure far from the original strike zone. Cascading impact on civilians. The human consequences of these failures are severe. Power outages do more than darken homes. Water pumps shut down, sewage systems fail, and up to 60% of mobile communication towers lose power. Heating systems grind to a halt precisely when temperatures plunge to -20 degrees Celsius. In Oryol alone, more than 225,000 civilians were left without heating in midwinter. This level of disruption is a catalyst for unrest. For years, Putin's implicit promise to the population was stability and security in exchange for obedience. The frozen streets and blacked-out neighborhoods of Oryol and Belgorod marked the public collapse of that promise, broadcast in silence, cold, and darkness to millions. Military implications.
Russia's air defense and electronic warfare systems depend heavily on the civilian power grid. When that grid goes down, these systems are forced to rely on backup generators. The problem is that generators cannot sustain the full operational capacity of advanced platforms like the S-400. As power output drops, radar coverage weakens, response times slow, and blind zones appear. Those gaps are exactly where Ukrainian drones slip through. By plunging Belgorod and Oryol into darkness, Ukraine did more than shut off lights. It exposed Russia's border defenses as largely symbolic. What was presented as a hardened shield quickly turned into an illusion. The consequences extend far beyond the frontline regions. Power disruptions reaching as far north as Murmansk, home to key Russian bomber bases, highlight just how shallow Russia's strategic depth truly is. Transformer failures in such distant areas underline the fragility of the entire system. When Murmansk's governor openly admitted that repairs would take a long time, it quietly confirmed a deeper reality. Russia's infrastructure is stretched to the breaking point nationwide. The strikes of January 21 and January 24 were not aimed solely at electrical equipment. They targeted Russia's capacity to operate as a coherent state. The blackout of Belgorod and the technological shock delivered by the Flamingo strike in Oryol marked a point of no return. A threshold was crossed. This was not simple retaliation. It was a strategic dismantling of the myth of an invincible Russia. Putin's long-standing narrative of absolute security has been cornered, if not outright defeated. For Russian citizens, war is no longer something happening elsewhere. It is present in the darkness filling their homes, the silence of dead infrastructure, and the uncertainty that arrives every night with the loss of power. That's my perspective. These are personal conclusions based on how I see the situation unfolding.